But what has become clear is that the mechanisms that sustained American hegemony are failing. The ideological project that kept the population involved in empire has eroded. The global alliances that made sure of American dominance are weakening. The economic system that sustains its expansions has transformed itself into a system of self-cannibalization. And the state? The state has retreated into this mode of direct control both at home and abroad. So, what's next? In the last month, we have seen the true face of the United States imperial decline. Trump met with Putin without Zelensky, without any other European leader. Zelensky, by the way, who was called a dictator and then dragged in front of the United States media and humiliated, made to play a part in this game that he was not even allowed to understand. We've been told this idea that Ukraine is righteous and no treaty can be achieved with Putin in power. But now, after years of war and destruction, we can achieve peace at the cost of Ukrainian selling off its mineral wealth and unconditional surrender. The message is clear: sovereignty is an illusion, and when the empire doesn't need you anymore, it discards you. Don't get me wrong, this has always been the case, but now it's evident, overt, clear, in your face. Europe watched this and had nothing to say. Their response was weak, hesitant, confused, exactly what one would expect from a continent that has been politically hollowed out. You have to understand that the European elite, trained for decades to follow Washington's lead, is not prepared for a world where the United States leadership no longer even pretends to consult them. They don't know how to function outside of American decision making, so their answer is silence, waiting for orders, like a dog.
I'm living the meme. It's like there's living the dream and there's living the meme, and it's pretty much what's happening, you know.
Even at home, the United States internal politics are just as chaotic. The appointment of Musk solidified the power shift that saw capital's grip over the state become no longer hidden. It's not like the state was ever separate from capital, but there was this pretense about governance, democratic institutions, institutional legitimacy that is now over, it's done. The moment is not about Ukraine or Europe or United States internal politics, but about a shift in how imperialism operates, about how it exists. The truth is that the United States does not need stable allies anymore. It needs compliant vassals. It does not need to build coalitions. It needs economic access. The shift from multilateralism to pure force is not a choice. It's a necessity. This is how empires act when they are in decline. They stop negotiating, they stop managing legitimacy, and they start looting. Think about it. Empires are not some eternal force, not some all-powerful structure that can bend the world to its will indefinitely. Empires are machines that are designed to extract capital from the periphery to the core, to ensure that those who sit atop its hierarchies remain there. And like any machine, it wears down, it accumulates contradictions, and eventually it breaks. In reality, empires fall not because of external forces, but because those dynamics that made it powerful also lead to its own destruction. You might have a question. Why is the United States called an empire?
In an empire, he's got an empire, and we're playing this game of empire. We don't want to allow any competitors or adversaries to challenge us.
At the core of this belief is the dollar, which acts as the world's preserved currency. This allows the United States to extract value from the global economy without needing to produce as much as it consumes. Countries hold United States debt, trade in dollars, and depend on American financial institutions. This financial leverage gives the United States enormous power. It can sanction, cut off access, or trigger economic collapses in countries that resist its influence. Then there's another big bad, the military. As you know, the United States has 750 military bases around the world, far more than any other empire in history. It doesn't need to control its colonies directly. It can through military alliances, arms sales, and direct interventions. Look at the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. They were imperial wars, but without the formal annexation of territory. Finally, you have the soft power. The United States controls the global flow of information and culture through Hollywood, Silicon Valley, universities, and NGOs that all spread American norms, making its dominance feel natural, not imposed. But when countries try and challenge this order by seeking economic independence, military alliances that are not controlled by the United States, or alternative financial systems like the BRICS, this mask slips off and you have sanctions, coups, military interventions. They all come into play. The thing is, the United States doesn't have that economic dominance that it once did, nor can it rely on soft power to maintain control anymore. These are the three pillars of the United States imperialism, and now we are looking at how they slowly crumble. So it's about control. Basically, what an empire is a vast network designed to extract resources from its provinces and bring them to the center. Take the Roman Empire as an example. It extracted wealth from its provinces and brought it to Rome in order to feed an elite class that could not sustain itself on its own economy. This same thing is true of the British Empire, that created this network of trade and production that ensured wealth accumulation in London while suppressing industrial development in the colonies. And the same thing is true of the United States. Okay, its tools are more sophisticated, its reach is more global, its contradictions are more severe, but the structure is the same.
I'll say it as bluntly as I know how. The American empire is over. We're done. We peaked about 12, 15 years ago, and we are on a down. And it's very hard for the American people, which I understand. I am one. It's hard to get your head around that.
All empires fall, and the American empire has been rotting from within for decades. The 2008 financial crisis was the warning shot, the moment when it became clear that the economic model sustaining the empire had reached its limits. And you know what they did rather than restructure the economy, rather than address the contradictions within capitalism itself. They doubled down on those toxic dynamics that were bringing the empire down. Remember the bailout, remember the too big to fail rhetoric. Either way, manufacturing was already hollowed out, sent overseas in the name of efficiency and profit maximization. But now, even the economy's internal logic began to unravel, to separate, to disentangle. And the clearest example is what happened during the pandemic. Financial speculation replaced production, and the economy became even more and more dependent on an increasingly insular tech sector, controlled by a small group of billionaires who wield power beyond the reach of any government. And this is crucial. An industrial economy needs millions of workers in order to function. But the tech sector is far less labor intensive. It generates wealth without distributing it. It creates power without participation. And the result is an economy that has abandoned millions of its own populations, leaving them outside the circuits of wealth, outside the corridors of power, outside of this ideological framework that sustained the empire in the first place. And this is the result of neoliberalism. 50 years of privatization, 50 years of deregulation and market fundamentalism have destroyed this illusion that the American state works for its people. You see it, you feel it. The state now exists in two distinct forms, one for billionaires and one for the rest. The first group, the real ruling class, operates largely outside of political institutions, using them when convenient and discarding them when they are not. Then you have the second group, the government. It still plays a role in governing, but it has been hollowed out. It has been transformed into a mechanism for crisis management rather than governance. The American people in this equation are an afterthought. They are governed, but they do not rule. And when the ideological glue that once held this system together weakens, when the people no longer believe the myths that sustained empire, the nation state must resort to other means. This is why control has become more overt, more in your face, more evident. This is why suppression has become more visible. We need more theory in order to have a better perspective on this process of imperial decay. Luckily, Italian economist and very nice academic Giovanni Arrighi has this theory of cycles of accumulation that gives us a better understanding of how empires rise and why and how they decline. For him, empires follow a pattern. First, an expansionary phase driven by productive investments, where capital is deployed into industry, infrastructure, and military expansion. This is when an empire feels unstoppable, growing through conquest, trade, and technological breakthroughs. But when the second phase comes, that's financialization, meaning that the cost of expansion grow and profits in production fall, capital moves towards speculation, debt, and financial instruments. The empire turns inward, relying on complex monetary systems and rent-seeking rather than productive growth. And this is the decline. His theory is not deterministic. He's not claiming that all empires act the same way and go through the same things. It's a historical trajectory that can be seen in historical empires, not only in the United States. It's a pattern that has been repeated over and over again. Look at Genoa in the 16th century. It moved from commercial dominance to banking and finance before fading. The Dutch in the 17th century followed the same route. Trade dominance, then reliance on financial markets, and eventual decline. Britain industrialized and ruled the world in the 19th century, but by the early 20th century it relied more on financial services and colonial rents than industry, leading to its collapse as the dominant power after the Second World War. The United States followed the same path from late 19th century to the 1970s. It produced a lot of things. It was a behemoth. It produced cars, steel, weapons, and this is how its global supremacy was built. But then you have the neoliberal turn in the 1970s, and it sent American capital into financial speculation, stock buybacks, speculative markets. Of course, this is an oversimplification, but you get it.
The problem of stability is when we define it wrong, we get illusion of stability. And the illusion of stability, in my view, is the cause of a lot of evil in that part of the world.
But what does it all mean in the broader sense? It means that an empire, when it begins to decay, to decline, it doesn't just collapse overnight. It becomes, it tightens its grip. It becomes more erratic, more unstable, more dangerous. And the state enters crisis management mode, not because it seeks stability, but because crisis itself has become a tool. In this neoliberal empire, the United States empire, crisis facilitates capital accumulation. Every disaster, every war, every economic downturn is an opportunity to extract wealth. This is the function of an empire in decay, to maintain its own dominance even as its foundations are crumbling. Perhaps more importantly, it's a sign that we are entering a new stage of disorder where old rules do not apply anymore, where structures that were presented as permanent are beginning to fracture. Empires do not just collapse overnight. They decay, they rot, they go bad, they overstretch their networks, they overextend their capacity to control, and maybe, more importantly, they run up against the fundamental contradiction of capital accumulation, the falling rate of profit. We are not talking about some abstract economic theory. This is the reality that governs how capitalism expands and contracts. As capital seeks ever-increasing returns, it must invest in new technologies, new efficiencies, new markets. But this constant drive for accumulation has limits. When those limits are reached, or when the profitability of production declines, crisis emerges. Let's do some history. After the Second World War, the United States was at its most powerful. It had an industrial base that had been touched by the war, an economy that was set up to dominate global trade, an army that could intervene anywhere in the globe. But this arrangement was not permanent. In the 1970s, you have the first signs of strain, stagflation, declining profitability, and so on. And because of this, you have this transformation away from producing goods and towards financialization as a means to manage these economic contradictions. So instead of producing goods, the United States empire wanted to manipulate capital itself.
Down 1.7% here, a loss of 37 points or so. Apple shares are just getting hammered this morning.
We're down by between 3 and 4.5% generally across these markets. Let's talk about the speed with which we are watching this market deteriorate. We're red everywhere, essentially.
Instead of investing in long-term industrial growth, capital turned to speculation, to bubbles, to short-term profiteering. And the dot-com bubble in the late 1990s was the first in a series of crises that exposed the unsustainability of this model. Then you have 2008. The financial crash was a big moment. It was when the system revealed itself as fundamentally broken. Massive bailout of banks and corporations was not a sign of strength, but of desperation. The ruling class had no other solution than propping up a system that no longer functioned, and so they doubled down. More financialization, more speculation, more war, more extraction, and this was the way in which you can sustain an empire when going through a period of economic contraction, through force. And this is where the American empire finds itself today. The contradictions have not been resolved, they only deepened. The military-industrial complex, once justified by Cold War geopolitics, has become an engine of endless war, necessary not for security but for maintaining profitability. The tech sector, once seen as the future of economic expansion, has instead consolidated into a handful of monopolies that extract data and wealth but produce little real growth. The political system has shattered under the weight of these contradictions, transforming the state into an enforcer of capital rather than a mediator of social interests. What happens when these mechanisms fail? When the empire can no longer expand but has to consolidate power at home? It's simple: repression. As ideological legitimacy crumbles, as economic crises become permanent, control becomes plain to see. The tools of democracy become irrelevant. The ideological unity disappears, and what remains is raw power, nakedly displayed. And this is where the United States is headed. The contradictions cannot be resolved because they are built into the very economic structure. The events of the last month are not isolated. They are symptoms of a system in crisis. The empire is running out of options.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
So where does this leave us? What's next? The answer is not simple because imperial decline is not a linear process. But what has become clear is that the mechanisms that sustained American hegemony are failing. The ideological project that kept the population involved in empire has eroded. The global alliances that made sure of American dominance are weakening. The economic system that sustains its expansions has transformed itself into a system of self-cannibalization. And the state? The state has retreated into this mode of direct control both at home and abroad. So, what's next? The idea of a multipolar world is often presented as an alternative to unipolarity, which means the dominance of a single empire. In this case, the United States. They don't call it imperial decay, they call it multipolarity. They dress it up as a natural evolution, a shift towards balance, a necessary correction. But listen to the way state actors or pundits talk about it, and you'll see the cracks. It's not about a more just and stable world. It's about managing decline, reinterpreting the loss of control as a strategic realignment rather than an admission of failure. For the American establishment, multipolarity is framed as an inevitable but manageable shift that can be influenced, directed, even weaponized. It's not that the US power is collapsing, they say, it's that the world is becoming more competitive. What they leave out is that competition on this level doesn't mean a return to balance, it means instability. The system they created after the Second World War was designed to function with America at the center. It relied on military domination, financial supremacy, and the ability to impose order through institutions that ultimately answer to Washington. And as that grip weakens, the old mechanisms don't stop functioning altogether, they malfunction. Trade networks become battlefields, alliances become transactional, conflicts that were once suppressed by overwhelming force now spill out into the open. The European leaders reacted with nervous caution. Their security, their economy, their post-war identity were shaped by American hegemony. Now, all of a sudden, they're expected to become independent, but without the military, financial, and even political structures to do so. Of course, their response is hesitant and reactive. They acknowledge the changing world, but they scramble to preserve the status quo. Meanwhile, rising powers present multipolarity as an opportunity, but even among them, the narrative is different depending on who is speaking. China frames it as a necessary correction, a return to a time before Western domination, while Russia sees it as a justification for asserting its own sphere of influence, an invitation to carve out regional hegemony under the guise of balance. Looking at history, we can see that these moments of multipolarity are never stable. They appear whenever a dominant empire loses its grip, but these moments never last. What they do is they accelerate the process of decay, leading to the emergence of another hegemon or a prolonged period of instability. Balkanization is not just a regional phenomenon, it's a logic of imperial decay. The world is not shifting towards a multipolar structure, but it's breaking apart, leaving power vacuums, ungovernable regions, and perpetual crisis. This struggle for influence among declining powers doesn't lead to a new order. It creates instability, as no state or bloc can fully impose lasting control. This is a reminder that empire does not simply cede space, it unravels in a messy and unpredictable way. The world existed before and it will exist after. The question is not whether this empire will fall, it will. The question is not whether decay is good or bad, but are there forces strong enough to shape what comes after? And if we believe that the decline of the United States means automatic progress, we're wrong. Power doesn't just disappear, it reorganizes itself. And the challenge is to make sure that whatever comes next is not another empire. The conversation continues. It is a developing topic. There are many other aspects to be detailed, discussed, whatever. But for the moment, this is the end of the video. So thank you for watching. I'm Daniel Gabriel. This has been a simple concept.